Okay, thank you for all coming today. My name is Rhonda Hoffman. I'm the genealogy specialist in the Grosvenor Room, which is the Special Collections Department at the Central Library in downtown Buffalo. The Grosvenor Room is open the same hours as the rest of the library. The only difference is we do have a few policies. We require you to put your bags and purses in lockers while you visit, and we don't allow food or drink. I like to let people know that so they're not surprised when they come. And if you wanted to view a rare book, you would make an appointment to view a rare book, but otherwise you can visit us whenever we're open. And we always have a librarian at the desk to help you with your research. So let's get to today's topic. Did you know that was in the census? So first, I'll talk about some birth, marriage, and death details that you may not have known were hidden in the census. The 1880 and 1870 census ask if you were born within the last year, what is the month? And this is something I learned about my ancestor, Adelbert Williams. And it turns out that he was born within the last year. And within the year means within 12 months before the official census date. So it's not necessarily in this particular census year, it could be the year before. So this could be 1869, but up to 12 months before the official census date. And Adelbert was born, you can see, in February. They have February listed here. The 1850, 60, and 1880 censuses ask if you were married within the year, and it's the same thing. Were you married 12 months in the 12 months before the census? And you can see that Edward and Harriet here, there is a tick in this column, and that means that they were married within the year. So now you can narrow down a marriage date for those folks that got married before we kept vital records. In 1870, it asks if married within the year, state the month, just like with the birth. So here we have a John and Mary Boehm, and it says that they were married in February. In 1900 and 1910, the census asks the number of years that a couple was married. So here we see Horace Hem and Abigail, and they were married 35 years. (1930) asks age at first marriage. And you'll want to pay close attention to this. So we have Ram C. Best and Louise, his wife, and he got married. His first marriage was at the age of 19 and hers was at the age of 35. And if you look at their ages, he's 20 years older than her. So clearly this isn't Ram's first marriage. If you do the math here, you think probably this is Louise's first marriage, but definitely not Ram's first marriage. So that can give you a clue. Maybe he had another family that you didn't know about. In the 1900 and 1910 census, it asks adult women, how many children are you the mother of, and how many of those children are still living? And for this, my ancestor, Agnes Hoffman, it says she's the mother of 5 children and 5 are still living. But if you look at this list of children, there's 7 children here. And they're all listed as children of Stephen. So it would seem that Stephen was married once before Agnes. In the 1910 census, if you look at the marital status column, and if someone is married, it should say, put a little number by the M's. And what that means is, so here we see a Rose and a Vincent, and Rose, it says M1, and Vincent, it says M2. So what that means is if it's a 1, that means it's the person's first marriage. And if someone is listed as M2, it means they were married at least twice. So it could be more than twice, could be married 5 times, but if there's a 2, there was another family before Rose. Next, some military data. The 1910 census asks whether a person is a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. So it's going to be in the column all the way over to the right. I'm going to zoom in. And so it's this third from the left column, and it says UA, and that means Union Army. It could also say UN for Union Navy, and it could have Confederate notations as well. And a lot of times I notice they put a lot of tabulation in these columns, so you really do have to pay attention. See how below here there's these numbers? I looked this up, and this is like when they went through and did the statistics for the census, they often in these columns just put these tabulation numbers when they were adding everything up. Oftentimes you'll see a check mark by someone if they have that they served in the Civil War. The 1930 census asks whether you are a veteran of U.S. military or naval forces, and they would write yes or no, and then what war or expedition. So let me zoom in for this one too. Again, all the way over to the right. So it asks, are you a veteran? And it's yes. And then what war? And for this census, we didn't have World War II yet. So WW means World War I. The 1840 census, though, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the censuses before 1850, where everyone was only the head of household was named, or someone who was living in the household who had a different surname. And all the rest of the family are just with tick marks for ages and gender. But if someone was a revolutionary or military services pensioner, then they actually named those people and they put their ages. So it's a little hard to read, but at the bottom here, this is one of my ancestors, Samuel Munson, and then it has his age. I did verify he was in the Revolutionary War and he did collect a pension. And above him, it says Mary Eaton, and then in parentheses, David Eaton. So she got a widow's pension from him. And I think those are both of their ages. It's a little hard to read, but I think that's both of their ages next to them. There's some notations or clues related to different ethnic groups that I think sometimes are overlooked. So in 1910, if they ask whether you're able to speak English, and if not, give the language spoken. And so this person, William Rojek, he's listed as being from Germany, and his parents are listed as being from Germany. But if you look at that language spoken, it says Polish. And so that's a clue to that there's something going on. For this time period, Poland didn't exist as a country. It was split between Germany, Russia, and Austria. So this gives you a clue that he was from the German area of Poland when Poland was split up. Sometimes the census instructions would tell the enumerator that you have to put a more specific detail for the birthplace. So usually if someone was born in a foreign country, they would just write the country name. But for this particular year in 1920, we see for the Lawrence and Julia Miga that they were born in the Galicia area of Poland. And if you look at the census instructions, you'll see number 139, it says, if a person says he was born in Austria, Germany, Russia, or Turkey, as they were before the war, so that's World War I, enter the name of the province, state, or region in which they were born, such as Alsace-Lorraine, Bohemia, Bavaria, German or Russian Poland, Croatia, Galicia, Finland, Slovakia, etc., etc. In 1860, as well as 1850, the US took separate censuses related to the enslaved. They had separate census schedules. And unfortunately, the enslaved aren't generally named on these schedules. So this is an example from 1860. And here we have some names, but these names that are listed aren't the enslaved persons, they're the slave holders' names. And then those that are enslaved are listed just according to age. So here we can see someone is 23, a male, and then what they call color, and this person is listed as B. But if an enslaved person was 100 years or more, they would name the person who was enslaved. So this is a rare instance where you might see that person named on a census. So here we see Robert, and he's 101 years old. There were mortality schedules taken for 1850, 60, 70, and 80. And these list people who passed away a year prior to the official census day. And I wanted to point out that these do list the enslaved. So this is a way to find someone's name if they happen to meet the criteria to be on this list. And sometimes they will even list the enslaver's name. So here we have down here, Sally, and R.W. Moore is the enslaver. It says she's 120 years old. I don't know, I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but even so, it has her name. And it also says where she's born, as well as, the other folks on the list. So that might be, that's a detail that might be difficult to learn if we didn't have this schedule. You can see it lists the cause of death as well over to the right, and the number of days ill, the person's profession. And it lists that Sally was a nurse. And there's a lot of just these little details that might be in the census that give a little detail about someone's life, something to add to their story. The 1860 and 1870 provides both the value of a person's real estate and a value of someone's personal estate. This is the Asa Ransom family in Grand Island, and you can see their real estate is worth $20,000. I did the math on that, and in today's value, that would be about $430,000, and then $16,000 in personal estate. The 1880 census asks, is this person on the day of the enumerator's visit sick or temporarily disabled so as to be unable to attend to ordinary business or duties? And it's a little hard to read, but this is a gentleman named Frederick Laub, and he's listed as having rheumatism. And looking through newspapers, I saw that he actually traveled to another location, to one of those like healing spring locations, to try to get healthy related to this illness. From 1850 to 1870, there is a column for whether a person is what they call deaf and dumb, blind, insane, idiotic, pauper, or a convict. So we do see antiquated terminology in census records. And we see a John Johnson, he's listed as blind. And you can see his profession is listed as beggar. Sometimes when you see census records, you're kind of confused because I'm going to zoom in here. You might see a person and you might see them listed as an inmate, and you're like, what is that all about? Why are they listed as an inmate? And you may not know to look towards the top of the sheet. That will usually tell what institution a person might belong to. When we see inmate, we often think of jail nowadays, but inmate didn't necessarily mean that in the past. Oftentimes I'll see prisoner for if they were living in a prison, although sometimes it might be inmate too, but inmate just means you're living, in some type of institution. And in this case, up at the top, it says St. John's Protectory in Lackawanna. And so this was Father Baker's. From 1920 to 1950, there's a little extra detail given about profession. Normally we see there's a trade for their occupation, but I think sometimes we forget that these censuses have a little extra data in it, which can, really help clarify our ancestors' life and what they did for a living. So if I zoom in, if you look over to the right, it includes not only profession, but industry type. So I thought this one was an interesting example. This person is in trucking for his father. And if we look down a little further, there's a cook at a hotel and a waitress at a restaurant. And, there's a lot more examples, but I saw this one and I thought, oh my gosh, what would we think if we saw this, if there wasn't clarification? There's somebody listed as a hooker and they work at the steel plant. But if we just saw hooker, what would we think? So I'm glad that they had that clarification there. And I wanted to remind you, for the 1940 and 1950 censuses, they started doing something where they had these supplementary questions for people that fell on certain lines. And I think a lot of times that might be overlooked. So usually they'll, in this case, this is the 1950 census that I'm showing. If you see these little notations here, these are the people for which extra questions were asked. So if you see your ancestor fell on that line, you definitely want to look towards the bottom of the sheet, which will have more questions answered about that person. And I just wanted to show you a list of some of the questions that were asked. So all of these, tons of other questions, about 20 more questions are asked of those people. And, some of those questions are, was that person living in the same house a year ago? Down at the bottom for women, if they were ever married before. So that could be they were married before, they were widowed, they were divorced. Has this person been married more than once? How many years since this person was last married, widowed, divorced, or separated? If the female was ever married before, how many children has she ever born? So there's all this great detail that I think sometimes people skip over that information. There's a great free website, IPUMS, and this is where you can go and you can see lists of all of the census questions were asked. And you can also see the instructions to the enumerators. So if you see something and you don't understand a certain notation for a particular question, or you don't understand why did they list that type of information, it looks different than the other people on the page. This will explain to you why those differences occur or what a certain abbreviations or notations mean. Next, I wanted to show you a few examples of things you might look over in the New York State censuses. So if you're lucky and you have New York State, folks, New York State took extra censuses in addition to what the federal government took. So the federal government took them every 10 years from 1790 until today. And from 1825 through 1925, mainly on the 5-year mark, New York State took these extra censuses. And one of the great things is that the federal censuses don't list the relationship of everyone living in a household together to the head of household until 1880. But for New York State census, beginning in 1855, they listed their relationship to the head of household. So here we can see an Oscar Smith, and there's his wife and his mother and his brother and his sister. Down at the bottom, we see people are listed as the head of household's wife and child and boarder and his mother. So that's an important detail. From 1855 to 1875, the New York State Census asks, if you were born in New York State, what county were you born in? So you look at all these counties. This is from an early time frame where you're not going to find birth records for these folks. You might find a baptismal record, but there weren't official birth records kept in New York State for this time period. You can see all these folks from Ulster, Orleans, Dutchess, Madison County. This is one way that I thought about applying that information about the county of birth. I found this Civil War record associated with my ancestor, James Bentley, and he's listed as born in Delaware County, New York. You can see that over to the right. He was in the Civil War. That was from his compiled military service record. And then to the right, this is a document from his Civil War muster abstract. And down towards the bottom, it lists the name of his parents, John and Mary, and it lists her surname as Borrow, B-O-R-R-O-W. And when I looked in the 1850 census for John and Mary, you can see them with the yellow and the green. John, Mary is listed as Maria, and James, their son, whose military record that was. The family next door is named Burroughs. And of course, that's very close to borrow. And a little bit down on the next page, there was also a Burrow family. And then when I looked in the 1855 census for the family, I have an arrow by John and Mary Bentley. And then if you look upwards, you can see Hugh Burrough, B-U-R-R-O-U-G-H, and his family. And if you look over to the right, he's from Delaware County, just like James was from. And there's a Delilah Woodcock that lives next door to Mary and John Bentley, and she's from Delaware County. And down the other side of where they lived, there's a Jane Brundage, and she's listed as from Delaware County. And you can see that Mary Bentley is listed from Delaware County. So maybe these folks are all related, and maybe that Borrow is really supposed to be Burroughs. I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but it's just a theory to go on. There's some extra data taken in these state censuses. In 1855, they list marriages and deaths that happened a year before the census date. And although they don't name the individuals, they do give detail about people, and you might be able to get a clue. You might see things lining up with your ancestor. I'm going to zoom in here. So it gives the ages of the husband and the wife and their previous civil condition. So were they married before? Were they single? Were they widowed? The month in which they were married, December, and then the town in which the marriage took place. So if you think, oh, this could be my couple, and I couldn't find where they were married. Well, they were married in the town of Ellington. So I should look in that area for information about them. And then I made a dotted line, and this is where the death information starts. So you could maybe line some of this information up with your ancestor. The age, this person is 66, male, white, married, time of death, November. He's from Vermont. He was a farmer. And then it gives the cause of death. So maybe you can kind of make a case that one of these is your ancestor. This information, the marriage information, is given in 1865 and 1875 as well, but this time we're lucky because the individuals are named. So again, this is just a year before the official census date. And here we see a Timothy Murphy on the top line, who is 35, widowed, who married Elizabeth Manging Sweeney. So that's the maiden name in there. She was 25, she was white, and then the date of the marriage is May 6th. So that would have been May 6th, 1865. And then it lists the city or town where the marriage occurred. And then it lists how the marriage was solemnized. So whether it was a religious ceremony or was it a civil ceremony, and these are all church marriages. So you can see RC means Roman Catholic. There's evangelical, Protestant, Episcopal, Lutheran. So then you'll know, okay, this is the type of church I should look in for those records. And about midway through, you can see this list was from Buffalo, but you see that someone was married in a town called Plummer. So that, leads you to, another location entirely, which maybe you couldn't figure out without this particular record. So these different schedules that I'm showing you from the state, these with this marriage and death information, they're mixed in with the general population schedules. So after the section, after you find your ancestor in the regular population schedules, start advancing forward through the pages. And usually you just go a few pages forward and then you'll see these listed. I've tried searching for some people on these lists and I didn't find them indexed. I didn't find these marriages indexed. I found them in the general schedules, but not in these marriage listings. Also in 1865, there is schedules associated with health. So here we have additional inquiries related to the deaf and dumb, blind, insane, and idiotic. And so we see someone, and it says that their general listings in the census is on page 75, line 41. And she's listed as, their terms, idiotic. And then the number of years that she's had this, and that is 24 years. And it says the cause by falling from her mother's arms. And over to the right, it says she's able to do housework. And it says that she's in a private home. You might see that she's in an institution. And then if we look on page 75, line 41, we see the person's name, Mary Elizabeth Smith, and she's 25 years old. So the accident happened when she was just 1 year old. And this is the column that indicates that she will be on this schedule, this tick mark here. So make sure you look at all those little columns. I know it's easy to just kind of glaze over those, but look at all those different columns in the census. The New York State Library has a list of all the different census questions that were asked for those New York State censuses. And that is everything I have. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. There's tons of things that I could talk about with the census records, but those are just some things that I think people kind of gloss over sometimes. I know I do, or you forget that information is in there, and then you go back and you look and you see what is in there. And then you're surprised, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was in there. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.